This equal time rule, what is it? Give us some little historical context, if you will, and how does it apply in this situation? Because it sounds like it's changed a little bit over the years.
Yeah, that's right. So this is when a 1934 law meets a very different political and media environment. And so the equal opportunity rule, came in the 1930s, requiring broadcast stations to give equal opportunities to political candidates. Obviously, that was a time when broadcast stations played a much more prominent role in American media than in the environment today. And that 1934 law that requires equal opportunity for candidates.
I mean, that was radio, right? We were kind of talking and
right,
and print
exactly.
or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. Originally, this was written for radio, and then it evolved to apply to the big TV stations. And now it says nothing about new media and regulating them, but this is still on the books. And so there have been developments since 1934. So if you go back to just 2006, the FCC looked at Jay Leno's Tonight Show. And it said, okay, if Jay Leno interviews a guest, does that qualify for the equal time rule? And the FCC staff then said no. The Congress added these exemptions for bona fide news shows or bona fide news interviews. Those don't apply. And so in 2006, they said Jay Leno doesn't apply. But recently, in January, the FCC said, hey, that 2006 decision about Jay Leno, that might not be right. We might not be sticking with that. That's where we are today after they put out that guidance. That's why Stephen Colbert's producers had this reaction.
I want to bring up a statement from CBS here. Quote, the show was provided legal guidance that the broadcast could trigger the FCC equal time rule for two other candidates, including Representative Jasmine Crockett, and presented options for how the equal time for other candidates could be fulfilled. You bring up a really good point about what happened in 2006 and what happened in January. Who is the ultimate arbiter of whether or not that rule applies to a late night show?
Well, so the FCC is empowered by Congress to make rules interpreting the equal opportunity law. Congress said that. And so there is some uncertainty on what is a bona fide news interview, a bona fide newscast. And the FCC is the body that's empowered to make that determination. So, and when you look at that 2006 decision about Jay Leno, that was made at the staff level. So you don't even need a full commission vote. Brendan Carr, the FCC, controls the staff. So he can have his staff take a completely different view on this issue. So the FCC gets the first crack at this. After that, the broadcasters could fight that. They could say, you're wrong on this, FCC. They could take it to court. The question is, does anyone really want to go through all of that? And so, that's the situation CBS finds itself in. Yes, if it really took a hard line on this stuff, it could probably say, hey, this law, it might have been good, 70 years ago. The First Amendment is a real problem with it now. They could probably win that fight. But is it really worth, getting on the wrong side of this administration over, one late night interview or a couple late night interviews? I think right now the calculus points to let's not rock the boat. And so it's much easier to go along.
I don't know. There's part of me, freedom of speech, being a journalist, broadcast, I don't know. There's part of me that's like, you think about the importance of being able to do this. Hannah Miller, I want to bring you in, media reporter at Bloomberg News. You've been reporting and writing about this as well. I mean, this is kind of a staple of late night, of seeing different politicians from both sides of the aisle. Throw podcasts into this too, but I understand this is like traditional broadcast. What are you hearing about this?
Yeah, so Brendan Carr had some really spicy comments this morning in the early afternoon in a press conference and talking to reporters. And he made very clear, that these issues affect daytime shows and late night shows, that they fall under the equal time rule. And he really came down hard on the media for how they're reporting this, the issues around lack of trust in the media.
But traditional linear television, he's not getting into cable and other things, right? It's
yes,
what's under the FCC, basically
exactly.
airwaves.
Yes. So yeah, that's his focus right now.
Yeah, I want to get both your takes on this. Hannah, I want to start with you because you've reported a lot on the new media and new media. But in an age of like, we call 2024 the first podcast election. It's like, does equal time actually matter in the era of Joe Rogan, where or the era of YouTube, where Stephen Colbert just posts this to YouTube, or Joe Rogan has a 3-hour interview with whoever? Does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question here, because people pick what they want. They have so many options now with, how things are so specialized in new media. They can jump to a podcast on anything they want. These issues that Carr is looking at, they're really focused on the broadcasters here. So right now, that could be questions coming up in midterms and things like that, and how podcasts should be governed. But right now, the focus is on traditional TV.
So, you've got a story out.
Yeah, I just saw, as you were walking in here, your story was literally published.
One of our producers, Talia, just sent it. Matthew, come on back in here, because I do think, this is a different administration. And many would say that various offices within this government is doing the bidding of the president. So I don't know, is this just something that is what this FCC wants to do? Or is there a bigger issue that maybe in times to come, we're going to look at the way people can view content, and it's just kind of a different world. There's just so many outlets out there, especially when it comes to political conversations.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to argue that these rules really make a ton of sense to just apply them to broadcast and not to the other media, and whether they're, that's fair. There's really a substantial question of whether it's consistent with the First Amendment to keep these requirements for broadcast on the books. But what you have today is just such a politically charged environment. You have an FCC led by Brendan Carr that has said, look, we're not an independent agency anymore. We serve the president. And if there's a political benefit to go after the media, and there's a lot of uncertainty on these old laws, it creates an opportunity for the administration to press the limits of the uncertainty in that law. And I think that's what you see here, because this form of media is still subject to these laws, and no one really wants to have a big extended court fight about it. It's not really worth it to the companies.
Listen,
so that's where we end up.
I want to go back to, Hannah, your story and what FCC Chair Brendan Carr said. He said you had a Democrat candidate who understood the way the news media works, and he took advantage of all the viewers' prior conceptions to run a hoax, apparently for the purpose of raising money and getting clicks. And this was in that open FCC meeting today. I mean, that's a pretty strong statement, as many would say, with a White House and a president who really understands how to use media. And I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. So that's a pretty strong statement.
It is, and he reiterated it several times today during, that session. The question here is media manipulation. He's alleging that, Talarico knew what was going to happen here, that this was going to grab attention and also campaign donations. Talarico's campaign reported that they raised $2.5 million, a record single-day haul, after that interview got posted on YouTube.
Matthew, coming back in here, I was intrigued with what you said about the FCC, at least under Brendan Carr, and the way that he's described it as serving at the pleasure of the president. Historically, when you look back at the role of the FCC, is that very different than how it's worked in modern history? Because my understanding is typically there are different members of the FCC that are part of different political parties for a reason.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've had a long history of independence at the FCC. Now, certainly the chair of the FCC has often aligned with the views of the president that appointed that commissioner, that chairman. But at the same time, there's also been an independent streak where sometimes you saw the president insisting on one policy, but FCC chairman would push back and say, well, maybe the First Amendment, maybe the law doesn't let us go there. that sort of has gone away these days. And you're going to see it in a Supreme Court has a case teed up right now about whether there are independent agencies or not. I think everything is going in the direction against independence for at least for agencies like the FTC and the FCC. That means that a chairman like Brendan Carr can't stand up to the president on principle, or else he's at risk of losing his job. President Trump can fire him for any reason at all. And so Brendan Carr has very little choice other than to serve the political message that the president is asking him to serve. And the law maybe gets, put aside, the need to save your own job.
Hey, Hannah, to be fair, the FCC did talk to broadcasters, right, back in January about what talk shows and late night programs needed to do. So remind us that. To be fair, it's not like this is coming out of nowhere. They had sent, I guess, some stuff around.
It's not.
Like a warning.
Yeah, it's not coming out of nowhere, especially because Talarico had a similar incident when he appeared on The View. It's a daytime show. And that triggered an FCC probe, an equal time investigation. And that happened earlier this month. So that was sort of the standard here. And CBS is claiming like, hey, yeah, we knew this could trigger something. And Brendan Carr also talked about that and said, they're looking at enforcement action.
All right. So where do we go from here, at least on this issue?
I wonder, Matthew, it goes back to the question about, old media versus new media and the age of podcasts, the age of going directly to the consumer, the age of, relationships that people have with individuals on social media, and how many, people can actually see something if it's on YouTube or on Instagram. And it raises the question about, is there a risk of a regulatory body saying to, the digital platforms and the owners of the digital platforms, the alphabets and the meta platforms, hey, we're going to regulate you the way that the FCC regulates broadcast?
Yeah, I don't think there's much of a risk of that, because the First Amendment would be a pretty big problem. So the Supreme Court has read the First Amendment to give the internet and other outlets pretty broad First Amendment protection. So you couldn't see, this is all sort of part of what used to be called the fairness doctrine,
right.
Mandates that the media have to be equal. There's no way that would survive a Supreme Court test for new media today. I'm not sure it would even survive for broadcast if we brought up that issue.
You're just saying that
today.
The broadcast companies don't necessarily have the resources or the desire to take this to the Supreme Court.
Right. Do we really want to have that fight when it's going to put us on the wrong side of this administration and we have bigger issues? The actual enforcement here against the TV stations is minimal. What is the FCC actually going to do about all of this? It can investigate, but these licenses last 8 years. None of them even are up for renewal during this administration. And so, it's a lot of noise with not a lot of real concrete threats to the companies. And so it's best to kind of go along for now.